A former Tiger is Bama bound, and how Will Campbell could be on the verge of LSU football history. It's Locked on LSU. We're here. Buckle up. Let's get it.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona, and thrilled to have you aboard with us here. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Brady Neal is headed to Tuscaloosa. Another LSU player that hit the portal that I neglected to mention. We'll get to him today. And then could Will Campbell be on the verge of some LSU football history? This may surprise you when I spell out what exactly Will Campbell is embarking on the journey this year in 2024 for the LSU football Tigers. We are brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We'll get to the football news in a bit, but I want to start with Brady Neal, who shortly after the end of the LSU baseball season entered the transfer portal. And if you were listening to us here on Locked on LSU or my daily radio show, by the way, After Further Review, heard weekdays in syndication throughout the state of Louisiana, this should come as no surprise because for the final month of the season thereabouts, we had heard whispers that Brady Neal was very likely a candidate to hit the transfer portal. And it makes a lot of sense. Well, now we know Brady Neal is headed to Tuscaloosa to play for Alabama and what will likely be his final collegiate season. A little bit of background on Brady Neal for those that kind of maybe forgot his recruitment. When LSU landed Brady Neal, along with Bear Jones and Ethan Fry, three very good catchers in that class. Brady Neal was the number one catcher in the state of Florida. He was the number two catcher in the country. And he was ranked by Perfect Game the number 29 overall prospect in America, regardless of position. So getting Brady Neal to campus a year ago was a really big deal for LSU. I guess it's almost 2 calendar years now, but for the 2023 season. And it was a big deal, and Brady Neal ended up winning the starting catcher job at the start of his freshman season. Arguably the biggest moment of Brady Neal's career came in that Arkansas series. If you remember, it was that Friday game that was supposed to be at night. The threat of weather, they moved it up to a daytime first pitch. It was Skeens against Hagen Smith. It was 1-0. And then Brady Neal hit a solo homer in the 8th inning to tie the game 1-1. Now, LSU would go on to lose in extras. If you remember, Chase Shores pitched out of the bullpen for LSU in that game. But that was a gigantic moment early in his career for Brady Neal, and the expectations were super high. And, it was at a time where, we weren't sure what Hayden Travinski would be. He, of course, emerged late in that 2023 season, was a critical part of LSU's championship run. And Alex Milazzo, while a very good defensive catcher, had struggled with the bat up to that point in his career. And they thought, look, if you can get Brady Neal's bat going, get you a little more offensively, that it would make sense. And in 2023, as a freshman, Neal started 26 games at catcher. Now, his season came to an end after April the 8th when he had that back injury that shut him down. And as a freshman, he only hit 209. So the defense wasn't as good as Milazzo's. And the bat, while he had pop, it never really consistently came along hitting for average. So going into this season, there was the thought, okay, well, Brady Neal's back. Alex Milazzo's back for a 5th season. You still got Hayden Travinski. And would it be a platoon? Would somebody ultimately win out? And Neal played in 44 games, but ultimately it was a platoon with Alex Milazzo, who really became, when healthy, LSU's everyday catcher. And you could look at the bat and say, look, he hit 276, Neal did in 2024. Remember, 202 as a freshman, 276 this last year. You go, that's pretty good. It's a really good improvement. What could he have done with one more season? But sometimes the devil is in the details. And Brady Neal, while he hit 276 in his sophomore season, Against SEC pitching, Brady Neal only hit 143. That's why he lost his job. Alex Milazzo showed he could handle the bat, hit for average, get on base, and he was a superior defensive catcher. And I think Brady Neal, as the season was winding down, realized he had to get some type of guarantees that he was going to be able to play and get innings and ABs next year. And that's something Jay Johnson couldn't guarantee, nor should he have guaranteed that to Brady Neal. So Neal left. He goes to Alabama, and you wish him well. The thing we always talk about with transfers or players that you miss out on, you'd love it if it's something like Paxton Kling going to Penn State where you never have to see him again. He's never going to hurt you. You know, there's certainly a possibility that Brady Neal, who has a skill set, look, Brady Neal is never going to be, I shouldn't say never, but I wouldn't anticipate that next year Brady Neal is a great, like all conference caliber defensive catcher. I do think with 200 ABs, Brady Neal, if he hits somewhere in that 276 range, you're right there, 275 to 300, then his double-digit homers, he's a really good draftable prospect next year because you can get him into a farm system somewhere. He can continue to work on the offensive side of things and continue to hone his skills and get better defensively. And maybe become a big league prospect because he has that higher ceiling because of the ability to hit for power. He has that power tool, which a guy like Milazzo is just never going to have. But we say it often, you know, a college coach's job is not solely to get guys ready to go play at the professional level. That's part of it, is development. But the college coach's job is to win college baseball games. And we had this conversation with Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson throwing 98 from the left side is incredible. You put him in a farm system, he's going to keep getting innings because his job isn't to go win games at the minor league level. His job is get better to help the big league club win games. So they're going to keep you running out there, even if you walk 4 guys in an inning. If you're at LSU and you need to win games, you can't justify it. So same with Brady Neal. If you're hitting 143 against SEC pitching, it doesn't matter what your ceiling is. You're not helping this team win, so the coach has an obligation to do what's best to help the team win games. And part of that this year, of course, was benching Brady Neal, which we saw, which is why he's now at Alabama. You wish him well, except when he plays LSU. I mean, I think back to Michael Barish, who was, of course, an LSU Tiger who, you know, couldn't get on the field, transferred to Texas A&M and became a team captain and one of the best players in the league, became an all-conference catcher and was phenomenal and really hurt LSU. You'd have loved for a guy like that to stick around and grow and develop within your program, but especially in the portal era now, it makes sense that Brady Neal jumped ship and has an opportunity in his draft year to try to go somewhere where he's going to get ABs and get an opportunity, you know, to play and to get those ABs and show off for the scouts for next year's draft in his draft year. So Brady Neal leaving LSU, we knew that, heading to Alabama. Now the question for LSU is, what do they do behind the dish? You know, Blaze Priester is coming in. Cade Arambidi out of the Houston area, one of the highest rated catchers in the country, a guy who his bat slipped a little his senior year. So you've seen his draft stock and projection fall maybe into around 3 or 4. And if that's the case, he probably ends up on campus. We've told you about guys like Bear Collins from St. Mary's, Max Coffer from Texas A&M waiting on their decisions. And both Priester and Arambidi are draft risks. Both of those guys could be picked and could sign in the draft. And that really leaves you in a pickle if you're LSU, which is why Jay Johnson and his staff have got to continue targeting catchers in the transfer portal right now, because even if you get Priester and Arambidi on campus, that's still not enough. You got to have a third guy behind the dish because you're a turned ankle, a foul tip off the hand. Anything can happen at the catching position at catcher there, and you're any of those freak instances away, you know, from being down to one guy. So you just can't let it happen. I know some people have mentioned a guy like Luis Hernandez. He's a first base DH only, and he's a draft risk as well, the Indiana State transfer. Some of you mentioned Eddie Yaman as well, the Dayton transfer, has caught in his career, but he's grown to 6'5" now, and I'm told he is first base DH, maybe third base, but at 6'5", they're not going to put him behind the dish to catch. So LSU's got to add another catcher somewhere along the way. I understand Brady Neal's decision. I think he probably made the right decision for himself to have an opportunity to go somewhere where he's going to be a starter and get to play every day. That wasn't necessarily going to happen at LSU. Certainly didn't have that guarantee. But for Jay Johnson, it's left him vulnerable behind the dish, and they got to add somebody else. So who that somebody might be, we'll talk about it as we continue here on the show. We move throughout the summer with the draft now just a couple of weeks away. And after the draft, we'll have a much better idea of what that roster is going to look like. Okay, we also know Justin Loer will not be back with LSU. And forgive me, this happened over the weekend, but we were talking so much in our bonus coverage about Texas A&M, their coaching decision with Michael Early, that I skipped over Justin Loer. So I do want to give you some perspective on why Justin Loer entered the transfer portal. We'll do that as we continue here on Locked on LSU, your team every day. We're brought to you by FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I love sports just like you do. I love sports so much. It's part of my culture, my day, my fabric. It's what I do for a living. And when the playoffs wind down, like, of course, we know they've just wrapped up the Stanley Cup Finals and the NBA Finals. The College World Series is over. We just get fewer games throughout the summer months. The sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. They can do the same for you. All you have to do is open the FanDuel app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, every day, FanDuel is hooking up all customers this summer with a daily boost or a bonus. So that's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Like, as we're recording this episode here on this Monday night, I'm looking at the Yankees on the run line, plus 108 for Tuesday against the Reds. A little 6:00 first pitch. Might be in on that one with Gilligan against Ashcraft. Coming back plus money on the run line at home at Yankee Stadium. That short porch to right, kind of like it a little bit. But find your own at FanDuel. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Proud partner here on Locked on LSU. So Justin Loer became the latest LSU player to enter the transfer portal. And as we've sort of mapped out here, Jay Johnson and Nate Yeski remaking the pitching staff, I've counted 15 guys, maybe 16, depending on what happens with Griffin Herring arms that they're going to lose. Well, I was counting Justin Loer already, but I was counting Justin Loer as a draftable player. Like, we know Gage Jump and Luke Coleman, Thatcher Hurd, Fidel Ulloa were all going to be drafted players, and they were going to be gone. And I counted Loer in that mix as well as those 5, and then the potential 6 was Griffin Herring, depending on what happens there. Does he come back? He is a draft-eligible sophomore. Does he come back for a third year, try to win a spot in the rotation? Or does Herring take $800K, $1 million, and go sign and start his pro career? We will wait and see what happens there here in the next couple of weeks. I mean, when the first 2 days of the draft come and go, we'll know. If Griffin Herring's name is called in the first 10 rounds, he's gone. If not, he'll be back at LSU. But Justin Loer is interesting because him entering the portal, I think, is merely a backup plan. I don't believe Justin Loer has any intention of playing another season of collegiate baseball. I'll remind you a little bit of Loer's background. I'll catch up to this point and why he made the decision he did to go into the portal. So in 2 years at Xavier, Loer was a bullpen arm. As a freshman, he had a 3.55 ERA through 25 and a third innings pitched. As a sophomore, more than doubled his innings pitched. Went from 25 and a third to 57 innings pitched. So he doubled his innings pitched and dropped his ERA from 3.55 to 1.89. So Loer, from freshman to sophomore at Xavier, had a huge jump. Doubled his innings, cut his ERA in half. So LSU's going, okay, there's an experienced lefty bullpen arm. Been pitching there at Xavier. Let's see if he can take the step up in competition to the SEC this year and see how he might be able to factor into your staff. Well, his innings pitched look more like his freshman year. He's back down to 24 and a third innings pitched in just 26 appearances this year, and his ERA ballooned to nearly 6. Loer had a 5.92 ERA. So the walks were a problem for Justin Loer this year, and he struggled to consistently get SEC hitters out. And when you can't do that, you're not going to get innings against SEC hitters, especially when LSU was 3-12 at the halfway point, and Jay Johnson made the very conscious decision to say, I just need to shrink my staff, the guys that I trust and I know I can trust. And that's effectively what happened with Loer. And so he just didn't see his innings. But remember, Justin Loer last month in June was also invited to the MLB scouting combine in Arizona, and he went and participated, and as I understand it, threw pretty well. So he's a junior. He's draft eligible. He just went to the combine, threw well. So why do you enter the transfer portal? Well, you enter the transfer portal as an option, as a safety net, as a fallback plan. This happened with a couple of guys LSU signed a couple of years ago. Remember Carter Young and Jack Pineda? Carter Young was an infielder from Vanderbilt. Jack Pineda was an infielder from Baylor. And after Jay Johnson's first season in Baton Rouge, he went and knew he had to add some infielders, so he went and got those guys signed out of the portal. And the draft rolled around, and both guys ended up getting picked and signing pro deals, and neither ever played at LSU, which is fine. That happens. And so there's two ways to look at it. You can say, well, why ever take that guy's commitment? Because what if? What if the draft doesn't go your way? It's the same. We have the same conversation with the really talented high school prospects. People say, well, why would you even take a commitment from a guy like Connor Griffin if he's never going to show up on campus? Because you've been recruiting Connor Griffin since he was in the 7th grade. And when Connor Griffin is 12, 13 years old, you don't know that he's going to end up being a top 10 pick in the draft. As you get closer, that starts to materialize a little more, but you continue recruiting him because you never know if Dylan Cruz ends up on campus. You keep recruiting because you never know if Alex Bregman hurts his hand, misses the bulk of his senior year, doesn't go in round 1 and shows up on campus. You keep recruiting him because if Cam Johnson doesn't get the big number he wants, he may end up pitching for you collegiately. So that's why you continue recruiting those guys, and that's the same reason why you take guys out of the portal as well who are a draft risk, because what if they don't sign? So that's why LSU took a commitment from Carter Young and Jack Pineda a couple of years ago, and that's why Justin Loer has entered the portal now. I fully expect he's going to get drafted, and he'll sign wherever he's drafted and go start his professional career. But in the event that a shrunken draft comes and goes and Loer doesn't hear his name called, he'll have an opportunity to go pitch somewhere else. And remember, I don't know that Justin Loer has finished his college degree, so he wouldn't be eligible necessarily as a graduate to transfer. But because he's entered the transfer portal now, remember, you just have to enter the portal in the window, which is Tuesday, the 2nd, July 2nd. And so if you're in the portal, then all you have to do is be enrolled in school by the time the semester starts. So you don't have to commit by July 2nd. You can wait for the draft to come and go and see what happens. And if he doesn't have if he doesn't get picked or doesn't like the offer he has and wants to go play another year collegiately and pitch somewhere, then he's in the portal. He can go somewhere based on whatever the need is after the draft dominoes start to fall. So I fully anticipate that Justin Loer is going to get drafted and is going to sign, is going to start his professional career. This is just a smart fallback plan for Loer, like it would be for any number of guys who are just trying to give themselves the best options, to give themselves multiple options, depending on how something which is inherently unpredictable, like the draft, may play out. So when we were counting our numbers, we already had Loer not returning. We just had him being a drafted prospect, not in the portal. But Justin Loer did, in fact, hit the portal this past weekend. I wanted to make sure we touched on that since I missed it while we were talking about A&M hiring Michael Early and all the impacts there. So it is Locked on LSU. Thanks so much for being here with us. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button if you would. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being here with us and for making us your first listen every single day. I want to wrap up with Will Campbell and Harold Perkins with some preseason honors, and Campbell potentially on the precipice of doing something seldom ever seen in Baton Rouge. That's next on Locked on LSU. So Walter Camp put out their preseason All-America teams on Monday, and 2 Tigers were honored. Will Campbell was named a first-team All-American in the preseason, and Harold Perkins was named a second-team preseason All-America by Walter Camp. And it's interesting because I want to make sure as this season goes along I do my part to make sure that we don't take Will Campbell's greatness for granted. That often happens with offensive linemen because it's not a stat compiling position. Even with defensive linemen, which is oftentimes inglorious, we know the impact those guys have on the game. You could see how Glenn Dorsey impacted games on the interior of a defensive line. Much harder to do when you're talking about offensive line. But, Louisiana, for all the great talent this state produces, largely, and it's bizarre, but it's true. I've done this job long enough and covered LSU for long enough in the state for long enough now, since 2003, and covering LSU fully on the beat since 2007, to know that this state oddly doesn't produce great offensive tackles, I should say, and quarterbacks. But we produce a lot of cornerbacks, a lot of receivers, some great defensive line talent, running backs. Oh, yeah. I could run through Leonard Fournette and Darius Geis and Jeremy Hill and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Darrell Williams and a whole long list of great running backs. And y'all know the list of receivers we talk about all the time as well. And obviously great cornerbacks and defensive backs that have made up DBU. But oddly, this state very seldom produces great offensive tackles and great quarterbacks. And in large part, my theory on quarterbacks is for many years in this state, high school coaches would take their best athlete and play them at quarterback. Again, not trying necessarily to develop a quarterback for the college ranks. It was trying to win games in high school. And so sometimes in high school, you take your best player, play him at quarterback. And generally, they're going to go play another position potentially at the next level. Maybe it's receiver or running back or DB or whatever it may be. And that's changed a little bit now as we've started to see this new wave of really elite quarterbacks in the state of Louisiana, from guys like Arch Manning and Walker Howard, and there are others coming up as well that we well know. But Will Campbell, if he does go on and like we all think he will, if he stays healthy this year and knock on wood, that would seemingly be the only thing that could slow him. And he's started 26 times in his 2 seasons in Baton Rouge and has been absolutely incredible. If Will Campbell becomes a first-team All-American after this season, that's something we have not seen offensive tackles do at LSU very often. And keep in mind, when you look at the best offensive tackles that have come out of this state in the last 20 years, I mean, I could point to Lyle Collins, who played at LSU, was a second-team All-American, by the way. I could point to Cam Robinson, who left the state, went to Alabama. Before that, you probably have to talk about Andrew Whitworth from West Monroe, who wasn't an All-American in his time at LSU, went on to be a second-round pick and have an amazing NFL career, a borderline Hall of Fame NFL career. But if I look at a list of first-team All-Americans in LSU football history, I mean, you can go way back to Sid Fournette in 1954. That was at a time where they didn't necessarily have it by guard, tackle. He played on both. He was an All-American, played tackle on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Fred Miller and Billy Truax and Remy Prudhomme were guys that saw some time both ways and largely were defensive guys or played on the interior of the line. George Rice, Tyler LaFosse, interior players. Robert Dugas in 1978 and Lance Smith in 1984 are, by my best research, the last time LSU has produced first-team All-American offensive tackles. Alan Faneca was a guard in 1997 as a first-team All-American. Stephen Peterman in 2003 was a first-team All-American at guard. Herman Johnson in 2008 was a first-team All-American at guard, and Will Blackwell in 2011 was a first-team All-American at guard. So you'd have to go back to 1984. 40 years. It's been 40 years. Lance Smith, 1984. 40 years. 4-0. The last time LSU had a first-team All-American offensive tackle. Let that sink in for a second. I mean, since 2003, the only team that's won more championships than LSU is Alabama. This has been a program that has pumped players into the NFL, that has had high draft picks, that has had All-Americans and national award winners, and it has been 40 years since LSU had an offensive tackle earn first-team All-America honors. Lance Smith in 1984. That is what Will Campbell is trying to kick down that door this year. So I understand we're not going to put a ton of stock into preseason All-America teams, nor should we. It's a great honor, but it's generally a recognition of what you've done in the past, and it's good talking points. That's like watch lists. What you really want to be on is the end of the year award lists. And Will Campbell's going to have a chance to do just that and to potentially be a guy who does something we haven't seen around here in 4 decades. And the fact that he's from Louisiana is even sweeter. No, by the way, the guy on the other side of the line, Emory Jones, could very well join him as a first-team All-American this year. It would not surprise me if LSU's bookend tackles ended up as a All-American duo. Then we'd really be talking about uncharted and unprecedented territory if it played out that way. But a long way to go before we get to December and the national award shows. But it's going to be a lot of fun talking about it as we get closer. Y'all, we're less than 2 weeks away from the start of SEC Football Media Days. I am really excited about being in Dallas this year for SEC Media Days. Brian Kelly and LSU kick off Media Days on Monday, and we'll be in that number for After Further Review. Of course, you want to catch me live weekdays from 3 to 6 p.m. Central and syndication all throughout the state of Louisiana. Of course, right here on Locked On LSU. So subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here for Locked On LSU weekdays. And, of course, on the Locked On LSU YouTube channel, smash that like button and subscribe. We'd appreciate that as well. And remember, speaking of YouTube, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Okay, that'll do it for us here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On LSU. Looking forward to a busy week, and we'll see you tomorrow for Locked On LSU, your team every day.